Alright, I'm reading more. Stave 2. The first of the three spirits. It was so dark. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of the chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and then from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, and then it stopped. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. "Why, it isn't possible," said Scrooge, "that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon." The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with his sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there was unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after a sight of the first exchange paid to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge, or his order, and so forth, would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again, like a strong spring released, to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream, or was it not? Scrooge lay in his state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, and then he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The corridor was so long that he was more than once convinced that he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. "Ding dong!" "A quarter past," said Scrooge, counting. "Ding dong!" "Half past," said Scrooge. "Ding dong!" "A quarter to it," said Scrooge. "Ding dong!" "The hour itself," said Scrooge triumphantly, "and nothing else." He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy, one light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the light of his bed were drawn. The curtain of his beds were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you by hand, not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains by his back, but to the ones which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor who drew them as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. He was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child, like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view, being diminished to a child's proportions. His hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on his skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if it were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet most delicately formed. There were, like those upper members bare, it wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of the wintry emblem, it had it trimmed with summer flowers, but the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using in its duller moments. A great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though when Scrooge looked at it with an increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered now in one part and now in another, what was light one instant, at another time was dark. So the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, now being a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now with a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away, and in the very wonder of this it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, you were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past, long past," inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap and begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap and forced me through my whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow? Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention of all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having wilfully benetted the spirit of any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed!" It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would not have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to the pedestrian purposes. That bed was warm, and the thermometer was a long way below freezing. He was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had had a cold upon him that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that his spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am a mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld, and more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood up upon an open country road, with fields on the other hand. The city had entirely vanished, not a vestige of it was seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. "Good heavens!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly, and its gentle touch, though it had been a light and an instantaneous appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice, and that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him to where he would. "You recollect this way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it?" cried Scrooge. "I could walk it blindfolded." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every single gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them, with boys upon their backs, who called to each other boys, and country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in the great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that a crisp air laughed to hear it. "My hat!" "These are but the shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us. The jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every single one of them. Why was he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them? Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at the crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon a Merry Christmas. What good had it ever done to him? The school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. But they left the high road by a well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion full of dull red brick, with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof, and a little bell hanging on it. It was a large house, but it was broken. Fortunes. For the spacious offices were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, and their windows broken, their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses and the sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it any more retentive the ancient state within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. There was an earthly savor in the air, a chilly bareness in the place which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight. Too much getting it by candlelight. Same thing. And not too much to eat. They went, and the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to the door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a large, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by the lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire. And Scrooge sat down upon a form and a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and a scuffle from the mice behind the paneling, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dooryard from behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of the despondent poplar, not an idle swinging of empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire. But it fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence, and gave freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him up the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon reading. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt, then by the bridle and axe laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba! Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old and honest Ali Baba. Yes, yes, I know one. One Christmas time when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come for the first time, just like that. Poor boy! And Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother Orson. There they go. And what's his name, who's put down in his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus. Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down in the jenny. There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business he had to be married to the princess? Here's Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in a most extraordinary voice, between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city. Indeed. There's the parrot, cried Scrooge. Green body and his yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out the top of his head. There he is. Poor Robin Crusoe, he called him, when he came home after sailing around the island. Poor Robin Crusoe. Where have you been, Robin Crusoe? The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Hello, hoop-a-loo! Then, with rapidity of transition, very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity for his former self, "Poor boy!" and cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him, after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now."